Ooh. Ooh. I mean, hey, that does take core strength. Look at their faces. This is like each one represents one of the stages of grief. Raygun's performance was not as disastrous as people are making out to be on the internet. Yeah, the kangaroo hop, it's kind of a beginner freeze, and she goes into a 6-step, into another beginner freeze. That's like week 1 of training type stuff, executed in a highly cringe way. I couldn't find a lot of specifics about Rachael Gunn's life before her academic career and her Olympic debut, but from what is available out there publicly, we can assume that she was raised in an environment that valued education, intellectual curiosity, and I actually think you could see some of that in her performance, but we'll cover that later. As we all know, Rachael was born in Sydney, Australia, and she earned her PhD in cultural studies from this university in 2017. This was after she got her bachelor's degree in contemporary music in 2009. So just off of that, we already know a little bit about her. She loves music, and she dedicated a big part of her academic life to cultural studies. Her thesis for her PhD was titled Deterritorializing Gender in Sydney's Breakdancing Scene, a B-Girl's Experience of B-Boying, which focused on the intersection of gender and Sydney's breaking culture. And you start to see more of the picture of where her passions and interests lie. She cares deeply about women's rights. I mean, she grew up her whole life as a woman, so she already knows what it feels like to be marginalized on that tip. But when she entered the breaking community in Sydney, she probably noticed there was an even more heightened hurdle for women who are trying to find their place in that scene. And seeing that her PhD was in cultural studies, we can assume that her appreciation for breakdancing as a cultural influence was authentic, although coming from the more academic side. Raygun was initially a jazz and ballroom dancer. She didn't start breaking till I think her late 20s, when her then boyfriend and now husband introduced her to it and encouraged her to get into it a little bit. And Rachael reportedly did a little breakdancing, but didn't take it serious until she saw how underappreciated the female dancers were. Once again, you can see how fueled she is by gender norms, music, and dance. And one positive thing I could say already is that she's fighting for what she believes in with education, teaching, being the change she wants to see in the world. And I could think of worse ways to fight for what you believe than that. Now, breakdancing was invented in the 70s in the South Bronx by blacks and Puerto Ricans. And even though most people think of the music, breakdancing was actually the first thing to go global out of hip-hop. Everybody wasn't feeling the music on a national, let alone a global level in the first years, but people all over the world were fascinated by breakdancing. And throughout the 80s, breakdancing's influence spread like wildfire. As it spread to cultures all around the world, it struck a chord with a lot of people who could relate to the struggles of the people who first invented and innovated it. So already within the first decade, maybe even half a decade of breakdancing's invention, it was already becoming an important part of people's lives in cultures all around the world. Breakdancing going global, it's not something that happened in 2024. Now, of course, we live in a world where money makes the world go round, and breakdancing was exploited and commercialized. And by the late 80s, corporations have pretty much squeezed all of the low-hanging fruit in terms of monetary exploitation, and they threw breakdancing to the side. In 1990, the year I was born, Battle of the Year was also born. Battle of the Year is an international breakdancing competition that became known as like the World Cup of b-boying and b-girling. Other international competitions soon came into effect, like Red Bull and others. In the 90s, 3 of the biggest powerhouses in breakdancing was still the United States, a then established France, and South Korea. Now, this was a pivotal era in breakdancing. There was always a passionate group of true school hip-hoppers that had always been breakdancing. They were always going to breakdance, but now they were just doing it for the love of it. You weren't getting jobs, you weren't getting commercials. All of that was in the past. But now, with these international competitions, they had something to work towards. Now, if you're from America like me, unless you were a breakdancer in the 90s, it was probably cool the first time you saw it, but a lot of people were over it. As far as the big stage, it was all about the music. Where the spirit of hip-hop, as far as breakdancing goes, was kept well and alive in this era was in the international scene. If you want to see more about this time period, I highly recommend Planet B-Boy. It's a documentary that I think you could still find on YouTube. It was one of those documentaries that a lot of breakdancers that I met considered mandatory watching. So it's been a lot of shit said online at this point about Raygun. First off, a lot of people pointed out that her performance didn't have the technical precision that's expected in competitive breaking. She was alright, technically, but also kind of unpolished. It didn't have the complexity and refinement that the other competitors displayed. She did, however, try to make up for that through artistic expression with things like the kangaroo hop, but obviously that didn't land very well with the judges or other homo sapiens. In competitive breaking, judges have a criteria to judge you on, and if you're not even trying any difficult or technically demanding moves, that's not going to help your score. The style that Raygun came with was obviously very unconventional, and a lot of people found it actually inappropriate for an Olympic level competition. It lacked that seriousness that one would expect at such a prestigious event. And this is where I'm sure Rachael's academic background in cultural studies likely influenced her emphasis on artistic expression. But once again, her execution of this was not well received. She didn't have that same fluidity and confidence that her other competitors had. And let's keep it real, any of us average citizens, if we had to get in a breakdance battle for our lives against Rachael, she's probably gonna beat us. But the issue is, she's at the Olympics, and people just expected more. Another criticism was her outfit choice. The Olympics committee allowed custom uniforms for this event, but Raygun, who had already become a target for mockery, found her outfit clowned on. A lot of people said her green and yellow Aussie tracksuit looked like a fast food worker's uniform or a courier's uniform. Honestly, it didn't make me mad. Tracksuits as a whole, it was a whole fashion movement in hip hop. So I know where she was coming from, but I also know why people are clowning on it because they're already clowning on her. But I think as far as the outfit choice, I think people are just putting 12s on 10s. Another criticism is that she was disrespecting the art form. This is something that I think is hard to argue for or against in a definitive way. Because she didn't adhere a little more to traditional norms and expectations, a lot of people felt it undermined not only the seriousness of the event, but the art form itself. A lot of people are just finding out how deep competitive breakdancing is thanks to the Olympics, but by 2024, it already has well-rooted traditions. Participants are expected to showcase their best, and Raygun's focus on her artistic expression over technical mastery was seen by a lot as disregarding these expectations, therefore disregarding the rooted traditions of competitive breakdancing. If you delve greedily and deeply enough, you can find support for Raygun in her performance. Supporters argued that her performance actually embodied the true essence of breakdancing as an art form, rather than just a competitive sport. This was because she focused on creativity, individuality, and self-expression. And the truth of the matter is that those things are the core to breaking's origins in hip-hop culture. Breakdancing and hip-hop in general began as a form of self-expression, among other things. This emphasizes your creativity, personal style, and Raygun's performance, although really weird, would remind some people of those foundational roots, where it was more about that artistic freedom than just adhering to competitive norms. After Rachael went viral, a lot of people searched her name, found out about her academic background, and a lot of people wanted to highlight and support her academic understanding of breakdancing, but more importantly, her love for gender politics and hip-hop, and they viewed her performance as an extension of her academic work. And I think that's actually an important conversation. Now, if you're a b-boy or a b-girl, or you've been following the competitions, you will know all about the standardized judging criteria. As breakdancing got huge, and international competitions were getting big, we needed a standardized judging criteria. It's a necessity. But one of the results of that was that a lot of the performances got derivative and formulaic. And that's not to say that modern breakdancers are betraying the original spirit. They're probably 100% expressing themselves, experimenting in their ciphers, practice sessions, and whatever. But when it comes to competitions, that's where those standardized criteria can create a lot of these formulaic performances. I think that's actually a good conversation within the breakdancing community. Because as breakdancing spread globally, even different regions and communities develop reputations in their own styles. When Korea came onto the scene over 3 decades ago, and yes, Korea has been in breakdancing longer than it hasn't, ever since its invention, the Koreans were doing things that people didn't know the human body could even do. And for a while, they really leaned into that, becoming the poster child for power moves, winning competitions with that. And a lot of breakdancers were even expressing frustration and wondered if power moves were going to be disproportionately valued over the other aspects of breakdancing. And speaking on a couple of her moves, can we put her cringe ass sprinkler move into context? There was a reason for that. Her sprinkler move was actually a response to an Australian journalist, Stan Porto. 85% chance I pronounced that wrong. Stan joked in an explainer video that explained the Olympics breakdancing event that we will probably not see the sprinkler move there. Raygun saw that. She knew creativity was a criterion and thought that it would be fun to see if a move like that could actually score points. The answer to that? No. So that was a playful response to the media. And if nothing else, I think this showcases her willingness to engage with the audience and the media, even in a high-stakes setting like the Olympics. Even though I can resonate with the motivation behind it, the execution was just simply not there. And I can explain that. Having a playful, artistic expression can still score highly in competitions by satisfying that criteria. Look at the example of Hong Ten. He's an OG in the breakdancing scene, a renowned b-boy, and he's successfully incorporated thematic elements into his performances. There was one, I think it might have been the qualifier, where the concept was the drunken master. He executed this both artistically and expressively, and technically. Both those three things. Grammar's hard. Anyway, a lot of performances like Hong Ten's are praised for maintaining that balance between creativity and adhering to the criteria of competitive breaking. And his ability to integrate a theme like the Drunken Master, which is characterized by fluid, unpredictable movements, demonstrates how an artistic approach can be executed while meeting those standards. So while Raygun's creative approach was admirable, and I do like that point of support, there was absolutely a potential for that approach to be executed more strongly. And there's one thing I want to mention, the gear. A lot of people saw one of Raygun's opponents, Nika from Lithuania. Now obviously, Nika's not wearing a do-rag to get waves. I think deep down we all know that, and she knows that. That's part of a breakdancer's uniform. That's just breakdancing gear. Why do some breakdancers roll up one of the pant legs up to the knees? Why do a lot of them always wear headgear? It has nothing to do with trying to get waves and more to do with protection and facilitating certain moves. If you have a head spinner on your crew, there's a high chance that he's going to be wearing headwear to the cypher or competition. So Nika didn't do that for no reason. She needed to have headwear. Now, should Nika have chosen a do-rag? Is that something her teachers and coaches recommended? Is that something she just wanted to do? That is an actual discussion. But as far as wearing that in general and the purpose behind it, it is functional. There's a lot of other criticisms and complaints about Raygun, breakdancing in general being the Olympics, and I'm not going to cover them because I think most of them are kind of silly or simply not grounded in truth. I think a lot of those complaints and criticisms have their roots in simply not understanding where breakdancing and hip-hop actually came from. Breakdancing started in New York. It was invented by blacks and Puerto Ricans. It wasn't blacks and then Puerto Ricans. It was blacks and Puerto Ricans. A lot of people trying to reference the history on news networks or whatever, put it differently than that. But to be clear, it is New York, particularly South Bronx, blacks and Puerto Ricans. Africans, Cubans, Italians, Asians, they all joined months to a few years after. Not decades after, but soon after. Before people outside of New York found out about breaking and hip hop, people inside New York found out about it. Before it left the city, it was already multi-ethnic. Hip-hop represented the spirit of the South Bronx, and soon after, New York City's marginalized minority youth. And if you're from a binary community where you belong to just one of two groups, you have to understand that New York City is mad different. New York City contains the most ethnically and religiously diverse county in America. New York City is not a binary community. I think I read a statistic once that there's like 400 or 700 or something languages spoken in a day in New York City. So when you talk about marginalized minority youth in one community, it might just look like one thing. But in New York, that is a lot of different ethnicities. And one of the most important ethnicities in New York City and its culture is Puerto Ricans. A lot of Puerto Ricans sweat and bled so that we can enjoy what we're enjoying today. And it just rubs me wrong when people keep trying to leave them out of the conversation. And a lot of those innovators have cited their inspiration for a lot of breakdance moves being from watching James Brown and especially Asian martial arts films. And not a lot of people are talking about this but I think there's probably some influence from West African acrobat performances. So breakdancing did not necessarily develop in a vacuum. It actually wouldn't exist without people loving James Brown, enjoying Asian culture, and finding out about West African culture. Appreciating, not appropriating. Another thing that I'm sure everybody's aware of by now, the 2028 Olympics in LA is not going to have breakdancing. Some people blamed Raygun for this, but I hope by now a lot of people realize that that's not true. This decision was made independently of Raygun's performance. The decision was actually made before the breaking events even started. Now, this decision was obviously met with disappointment from a lot of people in the community and even for those outside of it. The goal now for breakdancing is going to be to hopefully return the event to the 2032 Olympics. Now, to put this into more context, I think it's important to note that there's only a limited number of events that can be included in each Olympics. For whatever reason, the LA organizers simply did not see the value of including breakdancing, which I think is never going to stop boggling my mind, because Los Angeles is an important place in the contribution and innovation of breakdancing. I think that's going to be a huge miss in my mind. So I try to look into how Rachael responded to a lot of the criticism and the jokes. For some reason, I couldn't find anything. And if you know something I don't, please let me know in the comments. I did see a quote where she said, "Don't be afraid to be different. Go out there and represent yourself. You never know where that's going to take you." I've seen some sources say that was her response to the backlash, and I've seen on articles that came out before, which show that she actually said that before she even went up there on the stage. Now, while searching for how she might have responded, what I did find was Rachael speaking on her relationship with breakdancing and how it's been empowering, especially in her home country of Australia. She's faced a lot of comments and criticisms even before the event about how her body and the way she dressed was changing as she got into breakdancing. A lot of people telling her she should be more feminine, more traditional, but because of breakdancing and hip-hop culture, she found herself empowered to follow her own path, to embrace her identity and creativity without conforming to societal expectations. So from what I'm seeing, as cringe as her shit is, the way that she responds to criticism and adversity, I think is handled as well as anybody else could do it. So that's the journalism part of it. Here's my opinion. Raygun is clearly not born in hip-hop culture, but as a deep-thinking and positive woman, I'm sure she can relate to the struggles that define the generations that started and innovated breakdancing. And just knowing that she dedicated so much of her academic career to this art form, it would be really hard for me to believe that she's an appropriator or trying to disrespect the art form on purpose. I feel she's probably more educated in breakdancing than a lot of the people who's criticizing her. I think her interest is authentic. I think her personality and individuality that she was trying to showcase in her performance was cringe. I get her logic behind it. Yes, individual expression is what all of this was about. Like how we saw from other breakdancers, you can do that while also being great at breakdancing. I think we can also clearly see a tension between traditional sports and these newer, more modern expressions like breakdancing. I think there's a real conversation between the balance of the original spirit and formulaic performances. I think the main problem with her is that she shouldn't have qualified. Yes, Raygun knew that she'd be at a disadvantage to her competition when it comes to power moves, technicality, damn near everything. But that's why she chose to lean completely into creative and artistic expression and interpretation. Her performance was goofy, it was cringe, but some of that has to do with the way people chopped up the footage. If you saw her performance as a whole, it's like 4% less cringe. The part of her performance where she's doing sit-ups on the floor, that might look like an alien mating ritual to some of you. But doing moves on the floor like that, well, maybe not like that, has been utilized by other B-boys and B-girls in this Olympic event. It's just that they executed it way better. The way Raygun did a lot of her moves looked more like breakdance exercises, breakdance warm-ups rather than actual moves you break out in a competition. She had a cool performance last year that locked in her position to represent Australia. That's great, but for where she's at in these Olympic events, she shouldn't have been there. She just wasn't ready. And that, honestly, is probably not on her so much as it was on the people who organized it. I've been to more than a few breakdance battles, and I've watched tons more. In my opinion, I thought the judging was really surprising. There was more unexpected conclusions than in a Martin Scorsese film. There was a certain people that should have been in the finals that weren't there. Even a broken clock is right twice in a day. Even wisdom can slip out the lips of a fool. That means that there's something valuable in everything in life. And just because something is cringe, does that mean we have to completely dismiss it, everything that it could potentially teach us? Cringe is definitely cringe. And it's good to be able to laugh at ourselves sometimes. But what do we do after that? Do we get into toxic dismissiveness? Or can we still come back to ourselves and to each other afterwards? At the end of the day, we're all we got. Peace.